Okay, let's first of all, let's just jump right into the 5 reasons why women neglect to take responsibility for their part in what is dysfunctional in relationships. So the first thing is society, also known as social conditioning, also known as feminism. Women are growing up in a different age these days where there's a feminist movement that has basically spoilt women. Sorry, ladies, but in some ways this is absolutely true. All you have to do is look at the divorce situation and what's happening in the courts, and men are getting the shaft big time in divorces, and that's just one area. Yes, I know that women are getting literally unwanted shaft in other areas, but one negative doesn't beget or doesn't justify another negative. So aside from that, the reality here is that social conditioning has rewarded women for bad behavior. We're going to go into, again, what you can do about this as a guy or as a woman later. So the number 2 thing, and these are not in any particular order, but the second thing that is causing women to lack responsibility or to pass the buck or blame the man in relationships is social media. So I like to call it Insta-slut. So yeah, politically incorrect, welcome to my channel. But the reality is that because women can use social media to collect a really large audience, they really are influencing not only men by the provocative and sometimes really slutty pictures they put on social media, but they're influencing other women to do the same thing because they're being rewarded by having lots of subscribers, lots of followers, lots of fans who are encouraging bad behavior. And what's bad behavior? Well, bad behavior is subjective, but it's the behavior that as a man, you really don't want your woman, there's another one they're going to get me for, but you don't want your partner displaying to the general public. Maybe you do if you're also a narcissist and your ego is attached to their fame or what have you. But the average Joe doesn't want his girl putting out all her assets to the world. So that's the second thing. And then the third part of this is, sorry ladies, but single moms. The statistics don't support a positive outcome of the huge influx of single moms we've seen in the last generation or so. And what's happening there is that a lot of women, and I have experienced this firsthand with people that I've known and worked with, and even friends that have a bad attitude towards men. If they're a single mom, it's because their relationship didn't work out, and if they accept responsibility, then they're going to have a huge amount of guilt. Now, side note is women who have children, they're just born with guilt, or the woman isn't born with guilt, but as soon as a child is born, there's just this guilt that's dumped on them internally because they, just because that's the reality of motherhood, is that there's just huge amounts of guilt that women feel when they're mothers because they're never feeling like they're doing a good enough job, no matter how great they are. Like, that's just the reality of motherhood. But the thing that influences relationships is that when a woman becomes a single mom and because the relationship hasn't worked out, she will typically want to blame the man because it doesn't make her look bad in her own eyes or potentially subconsciously in her child's eyes. The second thing that will happen, or potentially can happen, is that she will replace the guy. So she's setting an example for her daughter or her son, or generally the world at large, that men are easily replaced even if you are a single mom. So, it's just the nature of things, but all of this has a compounding effect on how women are handling responsibility and accountability in relationships. So the fourth thing that will cause women to want to unconsciously pass the buck or not accept responsibility or blame is survival instinct. And basically what that looks like internally for a woman is that, again, because she's typically already feeling guilty about failure in relationships, and everybody actually does this, is that people generally don't want to be wrong, because if they're wrong, then there's a self-perceived and potentially other perceived lower value. And if there's lower value, then she risks being left behind or being treated more poorly than if she has high value. Anybody who has higher value is going to be treated better than someone who has lower value. Even though that's not right, that's typically what happens in the world in relationships, not just in romantic relationships as well. So that's another reason for it. I'm not saying any of this is right. None of this is healthy, but it's just the way it is. So if you understand it, then it might help you understand the steps that I'm going to give you coming up on how to deal with this, so that we can hopefully start to change the direction of how women are reacting in relationships. And so the number 5 thing, which brings me to the number 5 thing, is social justice warriors, also known as suckers like Steve. And I just used the name Steve because it's an S and it rhymes with suckers. So social justice warriors are the beta male orbiters who are supporting women in their bad behavior, whether it's with radical feminism. That's really not fair. There's a difference between certain areas of equality and just man hating, basically. And there are men who are standing beside women in the wrong ways. And a lot of those men are nice guys, not in the terms of a good man or a kind guy or something actually genuine, but they're the nice guys in the way that we talk about in Dr. Robert Glover's book, No More Mr. Nice Guy. They're the passive-aggressive guys who really actually have an ulterior motive, and they may not be aware of it consciously, but their motive is really to get women to like them so that eventually they'll sleep with them, which usually doesn't happen. But they orbit around hoping that their good behavior or their support of women's plight will get them laid, and that is not working to help either men or women actually come together in a way that is functional and loving and effective for both sides. We want to have a win-win, and that's why I always try to focus on the positive, even though these are all facts and statistics that you can look for. Like, what's the positive way to handle this? So that brings us to the 3 simple steps that men can do to help women get back on track to being able to be honest and to be able to take ownership for their part in where the relationship is dysfunctional. And again, this is not just with romantic relationships. So the first thing is that you've got to stop rewarding bad behavior. An example is stop following women on Instagram who are not the kind of woman you'd want to marry. Like, we're not talking about the women that you just want to have sex with. You've got to stop rewarding those women with your likes and your comments and your follows. Like, stop encouraging that bad behavior in social media. As far as feminism is, as far as feminism goes, or society, you need to be able to have discussions with women about where they are perhaps not considering the other side in a way that doesn't get them riled up, because women are very emotional. An emotional center in our brain is 8 times bigger than a man's. It's tied to long-term memory and even actually short-term memory. So we react differently because our biology, our neurology is different than a man's. So we essentially need to stop rewarding bad behavior. And the second thing that goes along with that is that, like I said, we need to start letting women know where they've contributed in ways that are not working for them ultimately in relationships with men. Because the thing is if women don't start taking accountability and ownership of what they're doing, then it's not going to change. Relationships are not going to improve, and there's going to be more and more single moms and single women and single men, because men are not putting up with this anymore, and they're going their own way. And there's all these other, philosophies and factions that are the result of women's bad behavior. Sorry, ladies, I'm a woman, but once you actually understand this, you realize the truth of it, and you realize that we actually have a lot of power in society in where we are actually taking relationships. And right now, we're not taking them in a positive direction, which means that men need to actually tell women what they're actually doing wrong. So it doesn't mean being angry, because angry doesn't work. Any negative feeling, not only does it poke the bear, I like to say poke the bear, negative emotion will trigger negative emotion in women. And actually it's quite similar with men and women, except that men don't react, right? Because they don't have the 8-time bigger emotional center in the brain. So you mull things over, even though you do get angry, but it takes more. Anyways, anger doesn't work with women. Negativity doesn't work with women. Compassionate understanding is what will potentially work with women. Not all women. It will take time for some women to get the message, but it'll only happen if all men will educate women in a compassionate way, just like I've said in some of my other videos, like treat them like children, for they know not what they do, right? So you love someone, if you really love women, you want to help them understand their own folly, because they're really not aware. I mean, I used to be there. I used to be, you know, what I consider a feminist, and it took me a while before I was like, wait a minute, this is not right. And it wasn't until actually I started coaching and I was working with women and realized how difficult it is to work with women. And I am a woman. So that's when I thought, you know, men really need a lot of help. And the only way for me to help men succeed with women is to help men be effective with women, so that we can change the attitudes of women towards men in a positive way. So that is number 2, is that you've got to be able to tell her specifically what's not working and why, but in a way that is non-confrontational, and then you just leave it at that. And if enough guys will do that, the next man does the same thing for her, the next man, and not to her, but for her, then eventually maybe she'll clue in that what she's doing isn't working for her or in any relationship, and maybe she'll change. And even if not, then she's not rewarded by having another relationship. So that brings me to step number 3, is walking away. If a woman is not taking responsibility or taking ownership, participating in what she's done in a relationship to cause conflict or to cause discord, then you need to walk away from the deal. Whoever has the more willingness to walk away from the deal has the greater negotiating power. And I don't mean that in a way that is negative to a relationship. It's just the reality of relationships. And if you are willing to walk away, she might have the inclination to consider why she's constantly being walked away from, if she's given the information for her to consider why men are walking away from her. So don't reward bad behavior. That's the bottom line. Don't reward bad behavior, but don't be angry. Or if you are angry, don't express it outwardly, because it won't help. Yes, it's frustrating, but here we're looking for what's effective in making change, and outwardly expressing anger or any other negative emotion is not going to work in your or her favor. And if you can't wrap your mind around the idea that compassion is the answer, then remember this: if you react, she wins. Just like a child who's doing something bad, if you react, they know that they're getting attention. Watch this next video there.